a little bit about what is communication and provide a bit of an introduction to what do we mean when we talk about communication, okay? So to begin, what I want to start with is just mentioning that communication is a really, really complex process that we do second by second, millisecond by millisecond, without even thinking about it. So I'm actually communicating to you guys now, and some of you are commenting back, which is brilliant. Some of you are giving me thumbs up, which is fantastic. Sometimes little hearts or little smiley faces bob across the screen. Absolutely brilliant, because that enables me to know a little bit that you're engaging and that you're involved in the conversation, and that I'm saying things that are actually you're able to relate to. And it's quite difficult in a session like this because I can't read anybody's body language and I can't read people's eye contact. So it does make communication a little bit difficult. So in that way, this situation in itself is quite complex. Now, communication itself is a highly complex system and relies on lots of different processes. It relies on we need to have cognitive processes in place to be able to actually communicate. We need to be able to read people's body language, maintain eye contact. We need to understand when to stop talking and when to start talking again. We need to understand when somebody might be bored of what we're saying and be able to change the topic accordingly. We also need to know when to speak and when not to speak, because there's absolutely certain times in life when it's not appropriate to engage in conversation, amongst lots and lots of other things. This is only an introduction, so we'll break it down as we go through the sessions. But what I want to get across is how complex communication is for all of us, and we do it without absolutely thinking about it, okay? Now, for our people with autism, we know that communication is one of the difficulties that they experience, so they've really got to think about it. They've really got to try and use them cognitive processes to be able to communicate what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and what their needs are. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to mention. It's a really, really complex process, and that's why we have speech and language therapists that support us for our children and young people. Speech and language therapists study for up to 4 or 5 years to be qualified within that, because it's a highly complex system that we have learned over many, many years from when we were tiny, tiny babies. Okay. The next thing is, why do we communicate? So there's many reasons that we communicate. Hi Bill, thanks for joining us. Got another one popped up. Lots of reasons why we communicate. Can anyone drop a comment below of why we communicate as adults? Okay, so you're communicating with me now. So in this forum, I think that you're communicating with me to find out information, maybe to get a bit of an overview of what's been happening at NIAS, and to touch base on anything that we might be developing. So that's the purpose of this level of communication. For others, it might be to explain our feelings, which we know is really difficult for some of our young people. It might be to get the needs met. Now, we communicate all the time to get our needs met, whether that's we need a drink, we're hungry, we're tired, we want to complain, something's gone wrong, and we want to get a positive outcome from that. We communicate when we don't feel well. We communicate sometimes just for a little bit of a moan. So some of us like to just have a bit moan, and that makes us feel better. We like to engage in small talk, so we like to communicate about things like where you're going for your holiday, what happened in EastEnders last night. All that stuff is chit chat, it's small talk, that's what we would relate it to. So many, many different reasons to communicate, and you can start to see when we talk about them reasons how that then would impact on somebody with autism, because if they have a problem communicating, they're going to have a difficulty getting their needs met, being able to communicate their feelings, being able to complain and protest, which is a really important thing that we're able to do, and be able to talk generally about what's important to them, which again is a really vital part of the world around us. So lots of different reasons why we communicate, and when we look at how we communicate, we do it through lots of different kind of mediums. Obviously the main one we often talk about is our voice. So I'm communicating with you now through my voice. However, you'll see I always do things with my hands. When I do training, I stand up and I'll move around the room, and I'm constantly communicating through hand gestures. We communicate a lot through body language, so all them subtle cues that we give off from body language, it's really important to get the full message from interpreting body language. Now again, for our people with autism, body language is something they can find really difficult to read, to interpret and to understand. Okay, so again, you can see why they may miss out on some of the key messages if they're not picking up on them social cues. Okay, Hi Emma, hope you're well. Hi Emma Mack as well, nice to see you. Hope Rosie's good, we've not seen you for ages. Emma, I hope your lot's alright. How was Christmas? Drop a comment. Sorry, there's just a couple of people joined us, I just wanted to say hi. So yeah, how and why we communicate is really, really important. And for some of our children and young people, they may communicate in different ways. They may use PECS, which is a visual system. They may use Makaton, which is a sign language system. They may use behaviour, and this is what I really want to start touching on when we look at this series, is behaviour is communication. So if your child or young person or adult is engaging in something like throwing themselves to the floor, tapping their head constantly, putting their finger in their eye, it's possible that they're trying to communicate something to you. Yes, there's some sensory considerations, there are lots of other things, but often when our people are engaging in behaviour, they're trying to communicate something for us, they're trying to tell us something that obviously is really important to them, okay? And communication itself is based on several steps, so it's about having a receiver, somebody who's able to listen and take on that communication, and somebody to obviously deliver that communication, which in this instance is me now. Now that sounds quite simple. I sit here, I talk, somebody listens and they talk back. There's so many different processes happening then. I don't know if anyone's ever been in a situation where you've walked in halfway through and you've realised that you shouldn't really be there, because two people are having a really in-depth conversation and you shouldn't be there because there's something happening between that conversation. They might be telling the other person off, they might be getting upset. What you're doing is you're picking up on all them subtle cues that we've just talked about, and you're leaving the situation because you can pick up on that communication. Again, for a lot of our children, young people, they walk into that situation, they don't read it right, so then they come across as being rude or obnoxious or butting in. Children, young people and adults with autism have communication differences, so it's not that they're being rude and defiant, it's likely that it's that they don't understand. When we talk about communication and friendship and play and things like that, we have kind of an old textbook view sometimes that people with autism don't want to engage and they don't want friends and they want to kind of sit in the corner and not really be with anyone. In my experience, the people I work with do want to be with people and they do like to be with people, but they might not know how to go about it. So for a typical game of tick on the playground where you chase people and you tap them on the back and then they chase after you, there's a whole process there that you've got to learn to make that game a positive experience. So one young man I used to work with would fly over mid-game when everyone had started playing, which obviously upset the children, and then would bang people on the back of the head because he was joining in. And we had to take 20 steps back to try and teach him, first of all, actually, how do we approach the game and at what point do we approach it? Because when somebody's halfway through it, it might not be appropriate to kind of jump in midway through. And over time, it was absolutely successful and it was a positive outcome because he could then engage in that game, which is what he wanted, okay? So with that, because it was a very brief introduction, I'm just going to ask, does anyone have any questions? Does anyone have any comments for us? Because this was just a very brief introduction to communication. But what we're going to cover in this series is things like looking at receptive and receptive and expressive differences that your child or young person might have. So things like echolalia, which is repeating words or phrases, repetitive topics of speech, maybe individuals who aren't actually starting, to talk. They might be at the babbling stage of kind of communication development. Everybody is communicating in their own way. That's one thing I want to get across as well. So sometimes you might see things written down where it'll say, he does not communicate or she won't communicate with us. Now, everybody's communicating in their own way, so it might be that that person isn't going up and asking for bubbles. It might be that they're going over and knocking the bubbles off the table. That might be their way of actually communicating that I want to play with bubbles. So I kind of don't really go along with this idea that your child or your adult can't communicate, because they all have their own ways of doing so.